This is the Tamron 17-70mm F2.8, a lens I'm really excited to tell you about today in my full in-depth review. This is a crop sensor lens for Sony E mount cameras. It's image stabilized, it's a fast f2.8, and it's a standard zoom with lots of reach. Basically a 24-105mm equivalent or thereabouts, which we have been waiting for in the crop sensor community for quite a long time. So guys, here's some specs on this lens if you've just getting started looking at it. My name's Stefan Malloch. I do a lot of photography and filmmaking news reviews and tutorials, so if you do like this video and it helps you out, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and join the community. Who do I recommend this lens to? Well, pretty much anybody. It's a great all-around shooter. If you're on a budget or you're looking for that one-and-done lens for Sony crop sensor cameras, this might just be the one. But having said that, let's dive right into this lens, start to rip it apart, starting with the build and features.
So here's a quick unboxing for you, and all you're going to find in there is a tiny bit of paperwork and the lens and a lens hood. No case or anything, they're keeping it to the bare bones basics, and because it is priced so well, that's probably to be expected. Now, having a look at the lens itself, it's very reminiscent to all the other Tamron lenses in the line and very comparable to the 28-75, the full frame masterpiece that everybody knows and loves. 5 3/4 inches is what you're looking at with the lens hood installed. Fully extended, you can add an inch to that. And for travel without the lens hood, you're looking at about 4 3/4 inches. It's also a great weight at 525 grams or just over a pound. This means that you can take it pretty much anywhere with you, and it's going to be a great travel lens. There are no buttons or switches, and it is a plastic or a composite build. As you know, it does extend as you zoom, and the big grippy oversized zoom ring turns easily and has a relatively short throw. The smaller manual focus ring is a bit lighter and turns easily, but you probably won't be using it much as this lens has great autofocus. On the front, you'll find 67mm filter threads as well as Tamron's proprietary coatings to help with ghosting and flare reduction. On the back, you'll find a nice metal mount with a little rubber gasket for confidence in weather sealing. And although there's no button for it, do remember that this lens is image stabilized, which is a great benefit for you APS-C shooters without IBIS in your cameras. So overall for build and features, I think this is a great little package and I give it 4.5 stars. Next up, we'll look at some comparables and talk about the value of this lens. And I'm happy to say that it has a ton of it as usual, like most Tamron lenses. At $799 US, it has phenomenal value. The comparables are much more expensive and there really aren't that many. There's the Sony 16-55. It is a G series lens and it's not image stabilized and quite a bit more expensive. Is it worth it? Well, check out my full comparison video on these two lenses to find out. There's also a few other options that you're probably aware of. The 18-135, although it is a variable aperture, and of course you've got the 18-105 f4, but these two really aren't in the same class as the 16-55 or this Tamron. Again, I think this lens is one that you could replace a few lenses with, and for value, I give this lens 5 stars. Okay, so next up is performance, and there's good news in this regard. Let's have a look at the autofocus first. It's actually really good. It's incredibly fast, it's silent, and that fast f2.8 means it's going to perform even in low light. Tamron's autofocus algorithms have been continually getting better, and this lens is no exception. Absolutely no complaints when it comes to autofocus. The manual focus performance, however, isn't perfect. If you're a video shooter, you're probably going to want something with a little bit more grace. Being electronically coupled to the camera, this lens's manual focus is extremely sensitive, but does actually feel a little bit better than the 28-75 in my opinion. And as you can see here, focus breathing is actually very well controlled. When it comes to photography, this lens's autofocus is even better in my experience, with absolutely no complaints. Here's a few test shots that I took to show you exactly what this thing's capable of. I'm really loving this lens's focal length. 17-70 is a really versatile lens, meaning you can shoot a lot of things decently. Now it does have a variable minimum focus distance, allowing you to get as close as 7.5 inches on the wide side, and a not so incredible 15.4 inches on the telephoto side of things. But I did find myself shooting everything from flowers to landscape to even some portraits. Its 9 aperture blades and fast f2.8 aperture means that you can get some beautiful out of focus backgrounds, and zoomed all the way into 70mm you can get some decent compression, meaning that it's going to be a fairly good portrait lens. Here's a look at the focal length in a real world situation, a 17-70, but with the crop factor you're looking at a 25.5 to 105mm equivalent. So let's jump in and have a look at one of the best features of this lens, which happens to be the image stabilization that's built in. Here we are at 17mm in a real world situation, just walking, and this is exactly what you can expect if you're maybe doing some vlogging or some filming at just 17mm. And of course, camera shake is going to be amplified, so here's what that looks like zoomed all the way into 70mm doing that same little walk. And here we are just hand holding it, staying still at 70mm. This is probably going to be a more accurate representation of some of the filming that you're going to be doing. As you can see, it does make a pretty decent difference. And if you're shooting photography, it's going to make the biggest difference when you're hand holding at lower shutter speeds. Okay, diving into sharpness and optics now. First, you'll notice that there is quite a bit of distortion and vignetting here, wide open at f2.8 at 17mm. Use your profile correction or your in-camera correction to clean that right up, and that's what we'll be looking at moving forward to test our sharpness out. So as you can see in the center here, a great performance sharpness-wise. It's pretty darn good with great contrast, and the corners are also pretty decent. You will notice that it does fall apart at the very corners here, and if we zoom in a whole bunch, you're going to notice some chromatic aberration, some purple and some green fringing, but definitely not a deal breaker. And as we stop down, you'll notice that the corners do improve, your best being about f8, but here we are at f4, f5.6, and f8. A pretty darn good performance across the board. And again, f11 is going to be looking pretty good too, even f16, but after f16, definitely that sharpness due to diffraction is going to start to creep in. But again, even at f21, completely usable, but you'll start to notice definitely a reduction in overall contrast. Here we are zoomed all the way in this time to 70mm wide open at f2.8. Again, you will notice without some profile correction, some distortion, some pincushion distortion here at the top and bottom. Clean that up to see all of that go away, as well as some vignetting, or you can also stop down as well. Now here in the center, pretty darn good performance once again, no complaints in the sharpness of this lens, but let's have a look at the corners in a bit more detail. They're definitely not perfect and do fall apart here in the last 10% or so, but definitely not a deal breaker. For what it is, I think it's a great performer, and as we stop down, you will see a noticeable improvement. Once again here at f4, f5.6, and all the way down to f8, and it's looking pretty good across the board. No chromatic aberration here to speak of. And then all the way down to f11, and once again, it's not till about f16 that we really start to see things degrade. And down to f22 is where we can see again that loss of contrast, and still completely usable, but definitely not as sharp as the middle of the aperture range. Overall, I'm very impressed with the sharpness and optics of this lens, really nothing bad to speak of for what it is. I did have somebody specifically ask me to do a sharpness comparison at 70mm versus 60mm, so that's exactly what this is for. This is for you, bud. And yeah, as you are probably aware, like most lenses, you are going to retain a bit more sharpness and a bit better contrast here at 60 rather than 70mm. You can see in the very corners there's just a hint of more sharpness, and again, it does follow through quite a little bit. Even there's a tiny bit of a different color cast here, which is interesting. So this isn't totally untypical. Even the 200 to 600, I find if you get out to 600 and then back off just a couple millimeter, you're gonna get better results. But there's your sharpness comparison there for the record. Overall, I think this lens optically is just fantastic for what it is. And looking at its performance as a whole, being a crop sensor lens that ticks a lot of the boxes of what people are looking for at this price, I don't think you can beat it, and I give it a solid 4 stars for performance. So wrapping it all up, I think you get the gist of my overall impressions of this lens. I think it's a great performer, and like always, here's my personal pros and cons for this lens. As a whole, I think Tamron's done a great job, and I love this lens for what it is. I give it 4.5 stars overall. If you are a subscriber, you also know that I like to rate things on a scale from never think about again to consider to definitely buy. And in this case, if you are on a budget or you're looking to have just one lens to take with you everywhere you go instead of a backpack full of stuff, well, this might just be the one, and I would say that this is a definite buy.
So there's my overall thoughts on the new Tamron 17-70. I hope you liked this video and it helped you out, and if it did, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and join the community. I will drop affiliate links if you're ready to pick this lens up down in the description for you. And of course, like always, make mistakes, be yourself, and get out there and take some more pictures. See you next time.